I'm Nina. Standing in the quiet, dimly lit ICU, looking at the small figure of Lily in the bed, I can't help but think about how my life has spiraled into chaos. Just a few hours ago, I was fired from my job at the hospital, and my husband, Tom, took our son, Jake, away. It feels like everything I've worked so hard for has crumbled in an instant. My journey in the medical field started with a passion for helping others. I've been a nurse in the ICU for years, and I've always prided myself on my precision and dedication. I remember one particularly grueling shift. There was a terrible apartment fire in the west side of the city. Wave after wave of patients were rushed into the trauma unit. Burns from smoke inhalation, fractures from panicked escapes, it was a nightmare. I was on my feet for 24 hours straight. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned, and the coffee I'd poured at the beginning of the shift sat untouched and cold. I moved from room to room, checking ventilator settings, titrating drips, and documenting vitals with the same steady precision that had become second nature to me. There was no time to think, only to act. Just as we were starting to get a handle on the situation, the double doors burst open again. Paramedics wheeled in a little girl on a gurney. Her name was Lily, a 7-year-old who had been hit by a car near a park. Her small body was dwarfed by the straps and equipment. Blood matted her dark hair, and her face was pale. The trauma physician called out orders, and the respiratory therapist adjusted her airway. Imaging results came back quickly, and the news was grim but not hopeless. After a brief and urgent discussion, we decided to place Lily under medically induced sedation to reduce swelling and spare her the worst of the pain. As the medications were being prepared, I noticed a woman standing rigidly outside the bay, her hands pressed against the glass. It was Mrs. Thompson, Lily's mother. Her face was ashen, and her eyes were wide with fear as she watched strangers taking care of her child. When the physician explained the plan, her composure shattered. She sobbed and fired questions at us. Why was sedation necessary? How long would it last? Was it dangerous? Would her daughter wake up? When the physician was called away to another emergency, I stayed with Mrs. Thompson. I pulled a chair closer to her and spoke to her quietly, explaining everything in clear, simple terms. I told her what the sedation would do and what it wouldn't, and I was honest about the risks without causing unnecessary alarm. She clung to every word I said, as if my words were a lifeline. When she asked if she could stay with her daughter for a while, I hesitated for a moment. The ICU policy was strict, especially after a mass casualty event. But looking at her shaking hands and the unconscious child in the bed, I made a decision. "All right," I said softly. "You can stay. Just please keep quiet and let us work." I dimmed the lights in the bay, checked the monitors one more time, and made space for a mother who needed to be close to her child. After that long shift, I was exhausted. As I walked to a quieter corner of the unit and pulled out my phone, I winced when I checked the time. Tom would already be getting Jake ready for his school play. I called him anyway. He answered on the second ring, his voice brisk and distracted, as if he was juggling a million things at once. "Don't forget today's performance," I said. "Jake's costume is hanging in the closet, the red one. Shoes are on the bottom shelf." Yes, I know," he replied. "We're on it." I could hear the clatter of dishes and the faint sound of the TV in the background. Then Jake's voice came through, clear and hopeful. "Mom, are you coming this time?" I swallowed hard. I pictured him in the kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep, his eyes full of hope despite all the times I'd let him down. "I just got off a long shift, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'll try, but I might need to sleep first." There was a long pause. Then Jake said, "Everyone else's parents come. You always have work." Tom stepped in. "Buddy, your mom saves lives. Someone has to do it." But I could hear the irritation in his voice. "This is the job you chose," he added. "It's not a 9 to 5 job." You can't expect things to stop just because there's a school event. I didn't say anything. I'd had this conversation with him so many times before. Every missed dinner, every cancelled weekend, it was all part of the package. I'll see what I can do, I said quietly, even though I knew the odds were against me. When I got home that day, all I wanted was to sleep. I didn't bother turning on most of the lights. My shoes came off near the door, and my bag slid to the floor. As I passed the kitchen, a soft chime broke the silence. It was a phone notification. Tom's phone was lying face up on the kitchen table, the screen lighting up the dim room. He never forgot his phone, not for work, not for anything. I hesitated, but then I told myself it was probably just a work alert or a calendar reminder. As I reached for the phone, it chimed again. A message preview from Miss Carter appeared on the screen. Ms. Carter was Tom's superior at the company. I'd heard him complain about her late meetings and unreasonable demands before, but I'd never seen this kind of message. Are you forgetting that I'm waiting? It's cold out here. You promised you'd pick me up. Don't make me regret trusting you. The words were brief, but the familiarity and the subtle intimacy in them made my heart sink. This was not how a supervisor spoke to an employee. Just then, the phone started to vibrate. It was an incoming call from Miss Carter. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, then I answered. Yes, I said calmly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by irritation. Tom, where are you? I've been waiting. This is Nina, Tom's wife, I said, my voice even. There was a long, thick silence. Oh, she said at last, her tone clipped and cold. I see. She then explained that her car had been in the shop since yesterday and that Tom had agreed to drive her to work that morning. Well, I'll take a ride share instead. Please tell your husband not to make commitments he can't keep, she said before hanging up. I stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Everything in the house looked the same, but something had changed. I told myself it could be explained, but the word trusting kept echoing in my mind. A few days later, I received a message in my inbox asking me to report to Dr. Johnson's office. The tone was formal and impersonal, with no explanation. My heart sank when I saw it. Dr. Johnson was the head of the ICU, and he was not a man for small talk. When I arrived, he was standing behind his desk, his arms crossed. We have a problem, he said without preamble. I straightened in the chair. What kind of problem? He turned his monitor toward me. Medication records from your last shift. Several vials of controlled substances are missing from the log, and the corresponding disposal containers were not logged or located. I leaned forward, scanning the screen. That can't be right, I said, my breath catching in my throat. I follow procedure every time. I don't make mistakes like that. Dr. Johnson studied my face. I'm not accusing you of intent, but the discrepancy exists. Memory isn't evidence. The incomplete records put the unit at risk. I felt like ice was forming in my stomach. Risk meant audits, investigations, and suspensions. I'd seen careers end over far less. I need time, I said, my voice unsteady. There has to be an explanation. You have 1 week, he said. Find the documentation, locate the containers, or identify where the breakdown occurred. And if I can't? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was cold. Then we proceed accordingly. As I left his office, I replayed the shift in my mind. I remembered the fire victims, the constant interruptions, and the child brought in near the end. And then I remembered that moment when I closed my eyes for just a second while entering medication data. Had it been longer than I thought? The possibility unsettled me. I'd never doubted my competence before, but now I felt exposed and unsure. What I didn't know was that Ms. Carter was behind all this. She wanted Tom to leave me, and she knew that if I lost my job, it would be easier for her to get what she wanted. She convinced her niece, Amy, who was a newly credentialed nurse, to work in the ICU under the guise of expanding coverage after the fire. Amy watched me closely. She noted my long hours, my skipped breaks, and how exhaustion dulled my focus. She learned the rhythm of my shifts and the moments when documentation piled up. She memorized the procedures, not to follow them, but to bend them just enough. She started by making small changes to the records: a missing timestamp, a delayed entry. Then she began to remove waste containers and hide pages from the logs. Each action was small on its own, but together, they formed a pattern that would surface when it was too late. One day, when I got home, I knew something was wrong. The air in the house felt different, stripped of its usual quiet. A suitcase stood open in the hallway, and Tom's shoes were gone from their usual place by the door. Tom walked out of the bedroom carrying another armful of clothes. "I'm leaving," he said, as if it was just a change in plans. "Leaving where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "With Ms. Carter," he replied. "We make more sense together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're serious?" "Yes," he said, exhaling as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I should have done this sooner." He then said that Jake would be fine, that he'd adjust. I felt something inside me break. "You're talking about our son," I said. "I'm talking about reality," he snapped. "Your job consumes you. You're never home. This isn't a life." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He continued, "Ms. Carter understands ambition. She has resources and influence. She doesn't come home exhausted and smelling like a hospital." I felt the heat rise to my face. "I save lives," I said quietly. "I'm tired of living in the shadow of your shifts," he replied. "Ms. Carter has real power. She's respected. I don't have to apologize for wanting more." The room seemed to tilt. Shock turned to grief, and grief turned to anger. "Get out," I said, my voice rising. "Get your things and go." He didn't argue. He zipped up the suitcase, picked it up, and walked past me without looking back. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. I stood there for a long time, my hands clenched at my sides, my heart pounding. When I finally checked the time, I realized Jake should have been home. I called the school, and the administrator told me that his father had picked him up. They'd assumed I knew. I called Tom again and again. When he finally answered, his tone was infuriatingly calm. "Relax," he said. "Jake's fine. We're at Miss Carter's place. He loves it here. There's a pool and a big backyard." "Bring him home," I demanded. "Why?" he asked. "He's happy. And honestly, this is probably better for him. You're barely holding things together." The call ended before I could respond. I lowered the phone slowly. The house felt empty and cold. In just a few hours, I'd lost my husband, my sense of safety, and my son's presence. A few days later, I received an envelope from the family court. I already knew what it was before I opened it. It was a divorce petition from Tom. The words were cold and clinical, stripped of any trace of the life we'd once shared. Just as I was trying to come to terms with that, I got a message from the hospital administration. I was called to an immediate and mandatory meeting. When I arrived at the ICU administrator's office, Dr. Johnson was waiting for me. His posture was rigid, and his expression was closed. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "The medication discrepancy was reviewed, and we're proceeding with termination, effective immediately." I felt the room spin. "You said I had a week," I said. "The decision was escalated," he said flatly. "This no longer sits at my level." I felt the heat rush to my face. "I didn't do this. You know I didn't. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. Off the record, I don't think you did. But someone above both of us wants this to happen. When the administration wants something, it happens. Who? I asked, swallowing hard. He hesitated, then met my eyes. Your husband's mistress. She's well connected. I felt exposed and humiliated. This is retaliation, I said. You can't fire me without proof. We're not firing you for cause. You'll be allowed to resign, he replied. So, I'm guilty either way, I said quietly. If this becomes a formal investigation, you risk charges that could follow you for the rest of your career. This is the cleanest option available to you, he said. I looked down at my shaking hands. I thought about all the years I'd spent in that hospital, the patients I'd cared for, and the sacrifices I'd made. I want this noted that I deny everything, I said. You can submit a statement, but without evidence, it won't change the outcome, he replied. There was nothing left to argue. I signed the resignation papers in silence. When I left the office, my badge no longer gave me access to the unit. The doors that had once opened automatically now remained sealed. I returned to the ICU later that afternoon as a visitor. The familiar sounds of monitors and ventilators followed me down the corridor, but everything felt different. Lily was still in the same bed, her chest rising and falling steadily under the sedation. Mrs. Thompson was at the bedside. When she saw me, her expression changed. Something's wrong, she said softly. I can see it on your face. I tried to smile, but it didn't hold. I was let go today. They say I mishandled medication records, I said, the words sounding flat. She frowned. You? That makes no sense. I hesitated, then shook my head. It doesn't matter. I don't have proof. And now Tom has taken Jake. She pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. She listened patiently as I told her the whole story, the messages, the affair, the missing records, and the resignation. When I finished, she said, You're not lying. I know you're not. Knowing isn't enough, I said, letting out a short, humorless breath. She reached into her bag and took out a folder. When one of the nurses forced me out of this room during your off shift, I went to the administration. I requested written permission to remain with my daughter. Our company sponsors this hospital, so they couldn't refuse. She opened the folder and took out a document. And while I was at it, I asked for permission to install security cameras in this bay for my own peace of mind. My heart started to pound. She took out her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. The footage was clear. Amy was on the screen, quickly and deliberately tearing pages from a logbook and hiding them in her pocket. In another clip, she entered the medication room and removed a waste container. I can testify, she said. I can provide this to the court, to the hospital, to anyone who needs to see it. I closed my eyes. A wave of relief washed over me, but then I thought about it. No, I said. She looked at me in surprise. Nina, this could clear your name. I know, I replied. But I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want my son back. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Lily will be discharged soon. She'll need constant care at home. I'd like to offer you the position. I opened my eyes. You trust me? She smiled faintly. With my daughter's life. I looked at Lily, then back at her mother. For the first time in days, the weight on my chest eased. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt steady. The transition to the Thompson estate was quiet. I arrived with a single suitcase, medical supplies neatly packed, and Jake's small backpack slung over my shoulder. The house was outside the city, surrounded by trees and open space. It was far from the constant noise of the hospital. Lily's recovery was slow, but she made small progress every day. At first, she slept more than she was awake. When she did open her eyes, she was confused and scared. I stayed close to her, speaking softly, and explaining each step before I touched her. Jake adapted more easily than I'd expected. The Thompsons made space for him without question. He ate meals at a long wooden table, played outside in the afternoons, and slept through the night without waking up from bad dreams. Day by day, Lily grew stronger. She learned to sit up, then to stand with assistance. I worked patiently with her on fine motor skills, turning exercises into games and praising every effort. When she took her first independent steps across the living room, Mrs. Thompson covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Thompson, who owned a private clinic, visited often. He recognized my skills and integrity. One evening, as Lily rested after therapy,